Welcome to Dog Patch Labs. This is my first time here. Nice spot. Thanks for coming along. We have Matt talking tonight, but before he does, I'd just like to say a few words. I'm Ciaran, Treanor. I'm CTO of a company called Sonolake. We're a software company, and we're based out in Blackrock. We have about 30 engineers there, and we have another office in Poland, in Poznan, and we've got another 70-ish engineers there. And we write a lot of different types of software, but one of the things we've noticed over the last 5 or 10 years is that most software has a web interface of some sort these days. And when you're doing a lot of projects like we do, one of the things that can really help you out is if you try and implement some best practice and try and adopt some ways of doing things. And that's an incredibly difficult thing to do these days because of the daily onslaught of new frameworks and tools and build systems that go along with the software environment that we work in. So a couple of years ago, we hit on this thing called JHipster, and it's a great way of, at least we found, a great way of bootstrapping web projects. And that's what Matt's here to talk about tonight. But I'm going to do something a little bit creepy now. And this is where Matt came from. This is how I found out about Matt about, 2005. Because we had the same problems in 2005. Too many frameworks. What's the best way of doing things? What build system should you use? And Matt had, one of the things about Matt is he's an amazing communicator. He's great in written communication, and he tried to clear up some of the stuff, and he built this framework called AppFuse that really kick-started Java projects with a web front end. And back then, web front ends were struts, JFS, tapestry, tiles,
Spring MVC, right,
and lots of stuff like that. And then with Hibernate backend and then Ibatis backends, and it was a nice way to stay away from J2EE as it was called at the time. And JHipster in many ways reminds me of that. That got you up and running off the ground really, really quickly. So it's a huge pleasure to have Matt along here tonight to tell us more about JHipster.
Thank you. So let me move my setup here. And then are you ready with the images? We're good to go? All right. Plug it in. That's not me. That's me. It's full. I would take it even if it wasn't. All right, so I'm gonna attempt to actually do a screencast at the same time, so you'll be able to watch this on YouTube afterwards. He's gonna record me. I'm gonna do a screencast. They're gonna merge it all together. See how it works. So hopefully the screencast doesn't take up too many resources, because when we get Docker going with 14 different containers, you'll hear the fan going on here. So I don't think we need system audio. We don't need any audio, probably. So I'll turn the audio off, right? You just want the video, Max? Just the video? You don't want me to record any audio, right?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. Okay, so try this. Okay, looks like we're good there. So usually when I do a new talk in a new location, I try to find a picture that matches that location and then use it as the title slide, right? It's kind of fun. It usually gives credit to whoever took the picture and everything. The beauty of this picture here was, instead of finding it on Flickr, I found it on Google, and then the person allowed me to buy it for only €8. Right? So I was like, I can expense that. So I actually own the rights to this picture now. And you can see who took it on the bottom there. If you actually go to their website, they have a ton of really good HDR photos on their website. And like I said, you can buy them for cheap. So HDR is actually high dynamic range. It's where you take multiple pictures and then you combine the darks and the lights and everything, and it really brings out the colors. So picture looks great. I love it. So my name is Matt Raible. I'm a hick from the sticks. I grew up in the backwoods of Montana with no electricity, no running water. I had to walk 1.5 miles to the bus stop every day, and it felt like it was uphill both ways. It wasn't really, but the cool thing was in the winter we cross-country skied, so that was fun. I actually have probably 10,000 hours of cross-country skiing in my life. Not by choice, though. I was like most kids, right? I complained the whole time. When we had to walk, it would be a foot of snow, and I would wear tennis shoes, right? Stuff like that. So I was still a little kid back then. This is a cabin I was born in. The cabin on the right is actually my parents' bedroom. My dad started a sauna business, and he sold one to himself. The one on the right was built in 1916 by my great-grandparents. They were from Finland, and I was named after my great-grandpa Matti, and they got it in the Homesteading Act along with 120 acres. So that's pretty cool. It's up in Montana. I was born in one corner. My sister was born in the other. My dad had a hunting knife. He was a doctor. I came out with my umbilical cord wrapped around my neck. My head was blue. He had the hunting knife. So it all worked out. I live in Denver, Colorado with my lovely wife, Trish, and my 2 kids from my practice wife, Abby and Jack. And they're teenagers. They were here last week. And they're great once you take their phones away. All right? Otherwise, it's, like that. But Trish is, it's a great story. I met Trish 8 years ago after coming to Ireland. So I had come to Dublin to speak at a conference. It was right in Trinity College there. And 2 weeks later, I'm at a friend's birthday party in Denver. And I had, seen her, but I hadn't talked to her. And then all I saw were her hands. And her hands switched from a martini to a Guinness. And I had just come back from Ireland. I was like, I need to talk to that girl. And the rest is history. Now we're married. So her name is Patricia McGinnity, a good Irish name, and she was just here last week, had a great time. I also have a middle child. This is my 1966 Volkswagen bus. It's got a Porsche engine in it and a stereo that'll make your ears bleed. It took me 12 years to build it, 7 different shops, and if you read my blog or followed it along the way, you probably never thought it was going to be done. I always thought it was going to be done, but I always thought it was going to be done in 6 months. And so it was finally finished about 2 years ago, and it's really fun to drive. I work for a company called Okta. My dad calls it Okra, and I'm like, Dad, it's Okta, not Okra. But Okta actually means a unit of cloud measurement. So 8 Oktas is a very cloudy day. In Denver, we often have 0 Okta days, where there's no clouds. We have 300 days of sunshine a year, so it's a pretty nice place to live. But if you're pasty white like me, you got to wear sunscreen all the time, so it's, it's nice to be here because I don't have to wear sunscreen that much. But we basically do users as a software service, which is UAS. Not a very good acronym, right? So I like to call it user management as a software service. We do authentication in the cloud, OAuth 2, OpenID Connect, and SAML. I'll talk a bit more about those as we get into it. But now I'd like to know a little bit more about you. So how many people are actively using Java? Okay, it's 90%. How many people are using JHipster? Okay, there's about 5. What about Spring Boot? Okay, most of the room. What about Java 9? We got 1. Last night we had 2. What about Java 10? We got 1. Any more? What about 11? Comes out in 2 weeks? No? Java 12 will be out in 6 months. So I think most people are going to be migrating to probably Java 11, more so than 9 and 10, because obviously those are going to be deprecated as soon as 11 comes out, and 11 is going to be one of the first long-term releases. I would encourage you, if you're interested in the future of Java or Java 11, there's a VJUG talk next Wednesday, which you can watch from anywhere, that some of the Java champions are going to be talking about what's coming, the licensing implications and all that, because there has been some confusion. Oracle's been like, hey, you got to buy a license to run this in production. That's always been the case. How many people buy an Oracle license to run in production? Yeah. I mean, it's no different than it has been in the past, so you don't really have to. Preferred server-side languages. How many people prefer or use Groovy instead of Java? Nobody? Scala? We got a couple. Kotlin? We got 1. That's about it. What about Angular? Anyone using Angular? Okay, about half the room. Anyone using React? Okay, we got a good bunch, about 6. And then anyone using Vue.js? Okay, not yet. For those of you who are using JavaScript frameworks, are you using JavaScript like ES6? Yes? Or who's using TypeScript? Okay, so a good amount of you. Great. So we're going to talk about microservices today. I'll do an introduction to microservices, kind of give you some background, some history on them, and then we'll talk about microservices with JHipster. We'll talk about deploying to the cloud. That is a pipe dream if I'm going to actually do a demo of deploying to the cloud. Right? Doesn't work well in meetups and conferences, even at home, even on screencasts. That screencast takes like 3 hours to shoot, and you have 10 minutes when you're done. Right? You're like, it finally works. So not a very demoable thing to do. And then I'll talk a bit about mobile apps with JHipster. We'll see how much time we have if we're going to actually do demos of a lot of these things. I can do a React demo as well. So my question is, how many people want to be here for an hour? How many people want to be here for 90 minutes? 2 hours? Who's got to leave in an hour? Yeah? Okay. So I would invite you to do this. The last 2 nights I spoke in Belfast and I spoke in Dublin, and it can get dry, right? If you get what you wanted to learn out of this talk, feel free to leave. Feel free to step out. I won't be offended. People walk out of my talks all the time. I'd rather you walk out than you fall asleep, right? And people fall asleep too. I'm not offended by that either. So if you're feeling the need to take a little nap, that's okay. So microservices, according to Wikipedia, was first used as a common architecture style at a workshop of software architects near Venice, hence the picture of Venice, in May 2011. So in May 2012, the same group decided microservices, plural, was a more appropriate name. But the interesting thing is the first time it was ever used like as a concept was during the Cloud Computing Expo in 2005. Right? So this is a long time ago, but they called it micro web services. And this is from Jewel Lowry. He had similar ideas in 2007, and his really hit the nail on the head. His quote is, services are composed using Unix-like pipelines. So the web meets Unix, true loose coupling. Services can call services, multiple languages. Complex service assemblies are extracted behind simple URI interfaces. Sound familiar? That's REST, right? Any service at any granularity can be exposed. So this has been around for a while. Like, all that happened was it got popular in the last 5 or 6 years. A lot of that's because of Martin Fowler up there on the top left, or on the top right. James Lewis is on the top left there. And then we have Adrian Cockcroft and Joel Wallens. Those were kind of the guys that really helped popularize the term at ThoughtWorks. So James Lewis presented some of his ideas in March 2012 at 33rd Degree in Krakow. And his talk was called Microservices, Java the Unix Way. And so Fred George is credited, he's not on this slide, but he had some similar ideas at the time. And then Adrian, who really kind of made it off because he did it at Netflix. Right? He worked at Netflix and he changed their architecture to use microservices and made it web scale, what they call it. So fine-grained SOA, right? We used to have SOA, microservices, really the same thing, just a different term. And then what really kicked it off was the article that was published by Martin Fowler in 2014 on March 25th, and it was just called Microservices. And that's where a lot of Java developers basically learned about it and started using it. And so technology has traditionally been organized into a development department, a QA department, the database department, right? And then you have, production, and those are all separate. Everyone doesn't sit together. So when teams are separated along these lines, it basically can be very painful to develop software and get it to production because you have to go through so many different things. And the QA team might take too long, and you're like, we need more QA people, so you have to get budgetary approval, and you have to talk to people that you normally shouldn't have to. So a smart team will actually optimize around that, and what happens is the DBAs start putting in stored procedures. Right? They're like, I don't want to talk to the Java team because they take too long, so I'll do it in stored procedures and then we can make it work. The Java team's like, I don't want to have the DBAs do it because they'll take too long, so I'll do it here. So this basically leads to Conway's Law, which basically says any organization that designs a system will produce a design that mimics their company's communication system. So this is why we've had these monoliths that are very indicative of how the company communicates. And so the philosophy of microservices is essentially do one thing and do it well. And what it really boils down to is being able to work at an organization that will allow you to do everything as a team, from designing the product to building the schema to building the code around it to testing it to putting it in production. And so if you don't work for an organization that will allow you to work on a team that can do everything without talking to other teams, microservices probably aren't going to work for you. You shouldn't even try, because your organization needs to be in a place where people can be independent and actually deploy these things and build them and do them all on their own. So people often ask, is microservices the future? It's kind of obvious now, right? This is more of a question 3 years ago. Nowadays, it's basically worked at a lot of big companies. It's worked at LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, Amazon, name any of them. I worked at LinkedIn back in 2007, 2008, and that thing was a big old monolith. And it took 20 minutes to do a build of Ant, and you had to have a Mac Pro. Everyone got a Mac Pro when they started, and they got a MacBook Pro. It was a pretty cool company to work at, right? You're like, I got $10,000 worth of hardware on my first day. So it was very painful, and they saw the pain, and they started extracting services out in about 2008 and 2009. Now it's completely microservices. So team capability is also another thing to consider. What you're doing if you adopt a microservices architecture and you already have a monolith is you're just taking the complexity that you have in that monolith and you're putting it on the network, which makes it even worse. So if you have a really good team, chances are you can probably take that monolith and make it work. If you have a poor team, just stick with what you have. Don't try migrating. A poor team will always create a poor system. So you shouldn't start with a microservices architecture. This is one of the things that JHipster makes it very easy to do, but it's not really recommended. You should start with a monolith, keep it modular, and split it into microservices as it becomes a problem. I worked at LinkedIn. I also worked at Overstock, which is similar to eBay. That was around 2010. Both of them were built on big balls of mud, and they were wildly successful. Right? These are billion-dollar companies that were doing just fine. They didn't need to move to microservices. The reason they moved to microservices was because of people, not because of the technology. They didn't have the ability to have teams push to production quickly. They had to get on the weekly release or whatever. They couldn't do it on a daily basis, and the whole war needed to be deployed, right? The 200 megabyte war instead of just the profile page or whatever. So that's why they moved to microservices. And even Java has really permeated a lot of these shops, not because people actually want to adopt Java at Twitter or Facebook. It's because they couldn't hire developers that knew anything else. There's more Java developers than anything else, and so they were easily able to hire Java developers, and then they were like, well, we might as well use Java. So when people say, every web shop that grows up to be a Java shop, that's a famous quote from an analyst in the US, it's because that's where the most people are. And so those companies actually need to hire engineers, so they did it that way. So if you have a monolith and you want to migrate to microservices, you have a good team, you have good communication in your organization, you should definitely check out Spring Boot. Makes it very easy to do. If you're using Spring already and you're not using Spring Boot and you have a bunch of XML, I'm sorry, you're about 10 years behind. You should start using the Java config and maybe consider using Spring Boot. Sales have skyrocketed. This is a slide from last year in 2017. You'll see it's the most popular Java framework as far as percentage growth on GitHub. I like to say it's become the on-off switch of enterprise Java. It automatically configures Spring. Its Spring Boot starters make it very easy that you don't have to go in and configure a bunch of beans and write a bunch of XML or even Java code. It's already there, and it's conditional on whether the object is in the class path or whether the dependency is there. There's external configuration. There's health checks. There's all that kind of stuff built in. No code generation. I don't know if you remember Spring Roo. Spring Roo was something that generated a lot of code, and that was very difficult to maintain, so they got away from that. JHipster, very difficult to maintain. It's a code generator. It's tough to get all the edge cases, right? We have a pretty big team, and they're pretty active, so it's not too bad, but I fixed 3 bugs today while practicing the demo for this. And I'm going to fix 1 more during it, maybe, if we have time, if we hit any. And I should let you know, Okta and a bunch of other companies actually sponsor JHipster now, so if you're interested in contributing, we actually have bounties on a lot of our bugs. You can make $100 tonight. You go home, fix a bug, make $100. So there's probably about 10 or 20 active bounties on existing bugs. We even have someone working on Vue.js. I think that's worth like $500. So it is possible to actually make money in open source. Not a lot, but a little bit. And it embeds Tomcat, Undertow, and Jetty. This was one of the big things that people have adopted in the last 5 years. Before that, we had Drop Wizard, which did the same thing, but most people were building wars and they were deploying to Tomcat or Jetty. And now with Spring Boot, you can just have a war or a jar and actually run it and have everything self-contained. So that's pretty nice. So if you're going to start with Spring Boot, you'll go to start.spring.io mostly. This is actually a project run by Spring Initializer. So this is an open source project that you can download and use yourselves. If you actually wanted to set it up at your company and exclude certain options from people not being able to use or limit the options, you could do that. You can even add your own starters for your company, so that's pretty handy. As Josh Long likes to say, it's the happiest place a Java developer can be. And I think it's true, because if you're starting a new app, right, you're not doing maintenance, Greenfield's pretty fun. Or you're doing a demo like this, which is fun too until you're doing it and then you're like nervous. But when you're creating it, it's pretty fun. So yeah, this is what it looks like, the web interface. You basically can generate a Maven or a Gradle project with Java, Groovy, or Kotlin. And then Spring Boot version will be on the right, and you'd obviously probably choose 2.0 or 2.1 snapshot now. It's got a bunch of different versions in there. You specify the coordinates on the left, and then you search for the dependencies on the right. You can also switch to the full version on the bottom and actually have a whole bunch of dependencies there. So I wrote a blog post about developing a microservices architecture with Spring Boot, and it kind of shows what we're going to do with JHipster. And what I've noticed is if I do this live coding piece, it's about 20 to 25 minutes, and I tend to lose the audience because they're like, hey, we're here for JHipster, and he just talked about Spring Boot for like 30 minutes. Come on. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to show you a demo of the completed app, and I'll look through the code a bit. But we're going to basically have an edge service that talks to a catalog service, and the catalog service has a list of beers. Pretty simple service, stores them in a database. The edge service will filter out the not so great beers. And then that's how it works. The Eureka service is what it used for service registry and discovery between them all. And so the demo is you go to start.spring.io, you create a service registry using Eureka server, you create a gateway, and then you create a catalog service. You create an endpoint in the catalog service, the filtered endpoint in the gateway, and then you show some failover capabilities, like if the catalog service is down, you don't want it to throw a 500 error, you want it to return like an empty array. So I show you how to do that with Hystrix. And then there's another demo where I actually integrate Spring Security OAuth to actually have a JWT token, and it propagates between them, so everything's secure, and they communicate that way. So the code for the project is on GitHub there, Okta developer, Spring Boot microservices example. So I have it on my hard drive here. We'll see if I can just run it. And so when I get talking, and I'm talking like there's something on my screen and you see this, let me know, because I will tend to do that a couple times during this. I just forget to mirror my screen, and once I mirror it, then everything should work. Okay, so this is in Dev Okta. What do we, Spring Boot microservices example. I upgraded to Spring Boot recently, so check out the master branch. Probably should have tested this part before I came, huh? We'll see. Spring Boot's pretty stable compared to JHipster, so I'll open it up in IntelliJ. How many people use IntelliJ? Most of you. How many people use Eclipse? At least a handful, that's good. Up in Belfast, there was one guy. I thought he was the NetBeans guy, but he was just Eclipse. Any NetBeans users? Any IE11, people that have to support IE11? Yeah? Have you tried to talk him out of it? You're part of the problem, you know. As developers, you should refuse to support IE11. There's a great quote I read. I sent it to the JHipster list recently. I was like, hey, check this out. So here's what we have. We have an edge service, or a Eureka service. Let's look at that first. It's a simple dependency here. You basically, all you have is a few things in here. You have data rest. Is this it? No, that's the edge service. I wanted the Eureka service. This has Netflix Eureka server, and that's basically it, right? It's its only dependency. If we look at its application.properties, it's just got a port, which is non-standard, right? The default for Spring Boot's 8080, and then it doesn't register with itself because that doesn't make a lot of sense. And then it also has a main class here that says, you know, enable Eureka server. And then this probably isn't running just because I haven't set up, you know, it's still indexing. So we could start that one first. See if it's up here. Eureka service. Probably needs to download stuff, so we'll try from the command line. That should work. Okay, you guys probably might encounter this on a daily basis. How many people type nvn Spring Boot run when they run Spring Boot? Okay, so I tried to convince the Spring people to change that, but they didn't. But I like to. So if you look at the build area of your POM, you can actually add a default goal. Spring Boot run. And then you can just type nvn. All right, saves you some keystrokes throughout the day. So that downloads everything. Build snapshot is missing. Oh, I'm using a snapshot. That's crazy. Snapshot dependency. Let's try upgrading. Why not? And then down here, I'm only going to give this a few more minutes and then I'm going to give up. So Finchley, Spring Cloud. Let's look at that dependency. I like to debug on stage. It's fun. Spring, not that one. Spring Cloud dependencies. So they got a new interface here on search.maven.org. Spring Cloud dependencies. Looks like SR1 is the latest, so Finchley SR1 there. So the snapshot. So at least I know my code's broken, right? I can fix that later tonight. Now we'll try that. So that started up. That typically runs on 8761 just as a convention. And then we'll look at our other services. So our beer catalog service, we'll make this fun for you, is just basically a list of beers. It uses Lombok to simplify things, but it has number of beers in here. So we'll change the list here. Give me like 5 beer names. Guinness? What is it? Bone Machine. So I should let you know that we're going to actually go out to Giphy and find an animated GIF that matches this beer name. So Bone Machine is your fault. Any other ones? What's it called? Beamish, like that? Okay. Couple more. Franciscan Well, like that. One more. You can be risky if you want.
Trouble Brewing.
How do you spell it?
Trouble Brewing.
Trouble Brewing, like that. Okay. That's a pretty good name. Okay, and then we have Budweiser, Coors Light, and PBR because those aren't good beers, right? And if you think they are, I'm sorry, you're not doing the demo. In the US, I do get people that argue every time, right? Like, Budweiser's a good beer, and I'm like, no, it's not. Okay, so we have that one now, and we can start that one up. So go into beer catalog service, and you know there's not much in there besides that. The Spring application name is all that you really need to change in the application.properties. Spring Boot run, and then we also have an edge service, and so this is what filters out the not so great beers, and it just returns a list of good beers. So this one. Get good beers, has a cross-origin annotation for the Angular client, and then it uses Hystrix to have a fallback method that actually returns an empty array list if it can't communicate with that backend. And it filters out Budweiser, Coors, and PBR. And then this Feign client is what talks to that backend service. so it's not hard coding like any DNS or IP in there. And then it's got enable feign clients, circuit breaker, discovery client, Zool proxy, all that. So make sure everything's started there. We have our beer list name, so that's working. And then we'll go into our edge service. And we'll do Spring Boot run there. And so once this is up, we should be able to hit 8080 and actually see that Good Beers endpoint and see our list of beers. So anyone use curl a fair amount during the day? Has anyone used HTTP Pi? It's great. It's worth coming to this talk for. So HTTP IE.org, very similar to curl, but it uses application JSON by default. So a lot of REST APIs, you'll use that, and you can get rid of stuff like localhost. So you can do localhost 8080. Good beers, and it's not up yet, so it's 8081, so 8081 good beers. You can see it pulled those through, right? So, and it does, nice pretty colored logging. The last thing is the client. So this is Angular. Did the dependencies change? Like, I haven't updated it in 2 months, so it's probably not going to work, right? It's a JavaScript framework, but we'll see. Looks like it worked. We'll pull it up. There's our beers. We got Guinness. This one's my favorite. We saw this one last night. It's actually Obi-Wan Kenobi. Hello there. I don't know why that's associated with Guinness. Here's the Bone Machine. Not too bad. Yeah, Trouble Brewing. Let's see this one. There are some racy ones that show up, but these all look pretty good. That matches Trouble Brewing, I guess. So there you go. That's how you develop, microservices architecture with Spring Boot to filter out your beers that aren't so good. So microservices with JHipster is fairly similar. It's built on all that same stuff. We just add a little more code on top of it, but everything you saw there, we're actually doing in JHipster. And one of the tenets and one of the ideas behind JHipster is we try not to do anything out of the ordinary for the project. So if the project, is Hibernate and they do things a certain way, we don't customize the code. That's one of our core tenets. We try to use the best practices of whatever the library has, so we don't really add anything on top of that. We have had some custom code for like Cassandra, but that ended up getting ported back into Spring Data JPA. So for the most part, we're just using the frameworks as they were intended to be used. So JHipster is a development platform to generate, develop, and deploy Spring Boot plus Angular or React web applications and Spring microservices. That used to say, that's our description on our website, it used to say it's an application generator, but now they're calling it a platform. And so people were asking me probably a month ago, like, if it's a platform, does that mean that you guarantee all the dependencies will work together and stuff like that? And I was like, we're not going to go that far. We're an application generator if you get into those kind of questions, right? So the reason they call it a development platform, though, is because there's so much to do with Docker and Kubernetes and all the different things that you will have once you actually develop an application. So JHipster's goals are to be a high performance and robust Java stack on the server side of Spring Boot. We do have a Kotlin blueprint that will actually generate Kotlin code on the back end if you don't like Java for some reason. And then the second thing is a sleek, modern, mobile-first front end, right? We use Bootstrap for that. Does anyone know the difference between mobile-first and responsive design? It's very subtle. The difference is mobile-first, you're testing on your phone first. Or you're testing with Chrome and its device toolbar. Responsive means you're using your big 30-inch desktop and you're squishing it down so it looks good on a phone, right? And you probably have a 2 megabyte payload and you're only showing about 20K of that. So if you're doing mobile first, it means mobile matters more to you than desktop. And it should, because the mobile web is way bigger than the desktop. And we'll get into how progressive web apps help with that, but it is still a big problem. Most websites are huge, bloated things, and our mobile devices work well when you're in your country with your LTE connection. You go to another country where they throttle it down to 2G, and you're like, this is barely usable. So it can be a problem. We do offer a robust microservices architecture using the Spring Stack, Netflix OSS, Elastic Stack, and Docker. We use JHipster Registry, we use Eureka Server, we use Netflix Zool for the routing on the front. And you might have seen that Spring Boot now has its own gateway, or Pivotal has its own gateway. They found issues with Eureka, and not Eureka, but with Zool, and so they rewrote it themselves. But Netflix uses Zool, so it's working for them, right? I don't know if it's a real problem, but we're keeping an eye on it. We just haven't migrated to it yet. And how it works with most things with JHipster is if someone contributes the code and is willing to maintain it, you're in. If you just want us to do something for you, come on, right? It's open source. You can contribute if you want. And then a powerful workflow to build your application with Yeoman, Webpack, or Gulp, Maven, and Gradle. Gulp is gone. I need to update that slide. Right, when we migrate to JHipster 5, we no longer have AngularJS support, so we don't need Gulp. As far as Yeoman, we actually might get rid of that eventually too. We're using it right now, but very minimally. It's causing more problems than it's fixing. But we are one of the most popular Yeoman generators, so if that's a marketing thing, it's working. So to use JHipster, you'll start with npm. You install it. If you're using any of the package managers like Homebrew on a Mac, you can also do brew install JHipster, and that will work. You create a directory and CD into it, and then you run it. So for Java developers, and most people really in the world, maybe JavaScript developers do it different ways, but creating a directory and then going into it and creating an app is not intuitive. You expect to be able to run a command, it creates a directory, puts the app in it. So the reason I say this is because everyone messes up when they first create an app with JHipster. They do it in their home directory, and then all the files are ended up in their home directory. And a lot of them are dot files, right? Dot, like, git, ignore, and stuff like that. So then you got to go clean up your home directory. So don't do that. Put it in a directory and then create it that way. And you'll see our microservices look very similar to what we had with just Spring Boot. Up here we have, is this thing on? I got a little laser. Oh, it doesn't work on TVs. That's weird, right? Works on like projectors, but not TVs. The Zool proxy, the gateway up there in the front, which is also where your React or Angular app sits. And then you have one-to-many microservices in the back end. So those are usually independent, right? They have their own databases, they have their own entities. And then in the front end, you'll generate the UI for those entities. And then you can use either console or JHipster registry for doing your service discovery. And then for logging, we have Elastic Stack, which allows you to do aggregation of all the logs of all the microservices, and so that works really nicely. And then one of the things I like to talk about is how to do OpenID Connect and how to do OAuth to secure your services. So OAuth was a response to what happened in like 2004, 2005, 2006, where you would go and create an account on Yelp or LinkedIn, and after you create an account, they would say, hey, can you enter your Gmail information so we could go invite your contacts to join you? And they would have in small print, this is your real Gmail password, right? And you would just assume that they're going to throw that away. They might not throw that away. They might keep it around and check your email every couple months and see if you have new contacts, right? And so security problem. And so OAuth 2 came along about 2009 and was basically for delegated authorization. So basically you go to what's called an IDP or an identity provider like Google, and you say, hey, can I access this person's information? The person says yes, they can, and then it comes back. Well, one of the problems with it was that it had no identity information. All it said was, yes, this person can access this information. And so Facebook and Google and Microsoft basically came up with this way of they had a /me endpoint. And if you hit that /me endpoint with an access token, you got information about the user. But it was non-standard. So they said, let's develop something that's standard so we can use OAuth as an authentication mechanism, not just an authorization mechanism. So they standardized on OpenID Connect. And how OpenID Connect works is, first of all, you'll go to the authorization server, which is, where the user's credentials are. So this can be Google, can be LinkedIn, wherever your users are. If you use Okta, like we hold your users, we sync with your Active Directory, all your employees are in the cloud with us, syncs back and forth, and then they log in, and you're passing in a scope. So with just OAuth without OpenID Connect, the scope can be anything. If you looked at Gmail's OAuth API, they would say you enter like Gmail send, Gmail read, like all these different scopes. Well, with OpenID Connect, those are 2 of the standard scopes, and there's about 10 more that you can use to get certain information. And then once you get consent from the resource owner, it pops up a screen and says, hey, allow Yelp to access your public profile and context. You say yes. It comes back to Yelp. And this callback is actually sent in the initial request. So in the app on accounts.google.com, you'll say that yelp.com/callback is a whitelisted URL, because you don't just want any callback to be in there. And then you'll go exchange that token for an access token ID token. You have the information. You can go to the user info endpoint. They change that /me to /userme or user info, and then you get all that back, and now it knows who you are. So we have that in JHipster, and it's funny because I worked for a company called Stormpath before I worked for Okta, and I was actually an independent consultant for 18 years. I hated full-time work, right? But I would often speak at conferences and stuff like that, and when I would go speak at a conference as an independent consultant, like maybe the conference would pay for my flight, but I'd lose a week worth of billable hours, right? And it was kind of expensive that way. And so I talked to Stormpath, and I was like, hey, how about I be like an evangelist of sorts, and you pay me to like write open source, and I can go speak at conferences and write blog posts and stuff. And they were like, sounds good. So that's what I do now. It's pretty fun. But basically, yeah, we'll skip that part. Talking more about JHipster. Monolith examples, since we're not actually going to go into the monoliths, I do want to point out that there's a few out here. There's one that I wrote for the book called 21 Points, 21 Point Help. And there's a mini book on that you can download for free from InfoQ. And then I forgot to update that to JHipster 5 demo. We can do that on the fly, right? JHipster 5. And this is basically a tutorial and a YouTube video that's like 12 minutes long that shows you how to develop a monolith. So monolith is just, single stack, talks to one database, doesn't have multiple servers involved. Much simpler. Start out with that if you can. And I've even done it where you can convert a monolith into like a gateway and then develop, your backend, and it's possible at JHipster, so you could do that as well. But now I want to talk a bit about progressive web apps. So how many people know what a progressive web app is? Okay, a few of you. Who's never heard of it? Okay, so it's Google's response to basically having an issue where people have really slow phones, or they have really limited hardware or limited space, and they can't actually install apps. Right? Maybe they're in India, maybe they're in Africa. They're just on a really slow connection, and it prompts them to download and install Twitter, and it's 60 megs. And first of all, that might take a few hours. Second of all, their device might not actually have 60 megs like on it, period, for them to install it. So progressive web apps are a way of building web apps that can act like native apps. So they have to originate from a secure origin. They have to use TLS, or we know it as SSL as well, HTTPS, all that. They can load while offline, which uses service workers. Service workers is a standard technology that runs in the background that actually intercept requests and be able to cache data. So if you've hit a website, it'll cache that data, and then you can basically work offline. If you've never hit that website before, data is not going to be cached, so it's not going to work. And then the web app manifest is how to install that progressive web app. So only until recently, it worked on Android, didn't work on iPhone. And you would go to a progressive web app site, it'd prompt you to download, just like you see the mobile banner at the top. You can install it, and it looks like a regular app. Even has push notifications if you want to implement that. So pretty cool thing. They can be installed, they look like a native app, distributed through the web, and they're fast. So Twitter, mobile.twitter.com, I use more than the Twitter app, just because it is fast, it's very lightweight, and they've seen a 75% increase in engagement since they deployed that about 6 months ago. And so a lot more people around the world are using it. So it's one of those things that I don't know if you experience it in your company if you're developing like for other companies, right? If you're developing B2B applications, everyone's on a fast connection. Like progressive web apps, maybe you don't need them because it's not an issue, but it is a better way to develop apps because you'll be concerned about performance. And for the most part, most developers in the front-end world aren't concerned about performance. They give a 2 or 3 megabyte payload, and as long as it happens fast on our laptops, then it's good enough, right? It's just like the guy who enables IE11. Got to stop that. So this is a quote from Alex Russell, who originally invented Dojo, and now he works on the Chrome team. And he's probably the biggest advocate about JavaScript frameworks suck. And the reason he says that is because of the bloat they provide and what we're doing with them, and the fact that we're not being responsible developers and actually creating good user experiences. So the quote from 2016, I have these numbers in here, and a friend gave me updated numbers recently. I haven't updated it, but the updated numbers are actually worse. So the quote is that 3 seconds on a 3G connection is realistic to load a website. Like, how many websites do you know that load in 3 seconds on a 3G connection? Not that many. So 53% of visits are abandoned if a mobile site takes longer than 3 seconds to load. Most people are like, I'm done, right? This is taking too long. The same report, this is from DoubleClick, which is owned by Google, says that the average mobile site takes longer than 19 seconds to load on a 3G connection. So what Alex says is we basically failed on mobile in large part because our laptops are filthy liars. We're developing these sites on super fast laptops with super fast connections, and we're never really throttling things to see how it might perform in the real world. So what he recommends is getting a $200 Android device with a 3G connection, and that's how you test things if you're developing mobile apps, right? Mobile web apps. And there's other things you can do. So mobile hates you, right? There's ways to fight back. You can implement the purple pattern, which I'll show you in a minute. You get that unlocked Android device. You test with Lighthouse. Lighthouse is actually embedded inside Chrome now. It used to just be an extension, but there's all kinds of things. There's CI tools that you can use with Jenkins or Travis. There's also the auditing tab in your Chrome developer tools that uses Lighthouse. And then you can also throttle your browser's network and CPU. And that's what Lighthouse does when it runs tests on your application. So the purple pattern is you push critical resources for the initial route so they're actually cached on the browser, in the user's desktop, or in their phone. You render the initial route, so that's there. And then you pre-cache the remaining routes, and then you lazy load everything else. So we're doing as best we can in JHipster right now to implement all these patterns. And code splitting is a big part of that, right? So instead of getting a 2 megabyte download initially, you get like 50K, and then it incrementally loads more than that. So I wrote a very clickbaity article called The Ultimate Guide to Progressive Web Applications for Scotch.io. It's about a year old, but most of it's still relevant. The Angular stuff has changed a bit. It's easier now, but React and Vue hasn't changed. It's basically built into their CLI tools. You generate an app with a PWA template, and it all works. The cool thing that they do is they do it only at production time, and that's what we do at JHipster as well. So when you're in development, like for the last 10 years, we've been getting our browsers or trying to get our browsers to stop caching, right? It's like a web developer's worst nightmare. Like, I just updated that. Why isn't it changing in the browser? Well, as soon as you start using PWAs, like, it's meant to not change, right? And so during development, it can be very frustrating. I'll show you some techniques to get around that. So now I'll do a demo of JHipster microservices. We'll create a gateway. We'll create a backend store application, a blog, microservices app, and then we'll have entities for those. We'll convert the gateway to be a PWA. If I remember, if I don't, it's just like one index.html file, and you go in there and you comment out 5 lines of code. They're already commented out. You just uncomment them, and it works. And then we'll run everything in Docker. And I'll see where we are at that point, because the Docker can take a while. We can all gather around my laptop. It makes a good heater at that point if we want. But we'll see how it goes. So I did this run through this morning, and I found a couple bugs. I did the OAuth implementation, and so I know that works, so that's what I'm going to do today. And I'm actually using the master branch. So every time I've done this presentation, I've done the demo before it, I've found bugs, and I've always used the master branch. Does it work? No, I'm gonna forget to do something, and it might mess up. But hey, there's always the perfect day, right? So the one thing I do want to tell you about is a great tool called fkill. Fkill CLI. So this tool, if you use Java, right, kill all Java. Oh, sorry. So kill all Java will kill all your Java processes, can be very handy. fkill kills many processes, but it also allows you to actually kill like ports, right? So you can see here 8080, right? And it's pretty easy to install there. I use it all the time, so I'll just make sure all the Java stuff is killed. Nothing's running there, but you can also do kill all Java. Okay, so now we'll go back here. I have my backup in case this doesn't work, so we'll move apps to apps.back. And then JHipster version. I'm using the latest version, but again, it is the master branch, so 5.3.1. We'll make an apps directory, cd into that. And we're going to have 3 directories, gateway, blog, and a store. So we'll start with gateway. And we'll run JHipster. And so we're going to create a microservices gateway. We'll just call it gateway. We'll run it on port 8080. Com, Okta, developer, and then gateway. Oh, see that? Put too many W's. So then you just cancel and start over. All right, it's easy enough. You could also rerun it. One of the techniques you can do is it generates a .yo-rc.json file. You can go and just modify that and rerun JHipster, and it'll regenerate all your code, so that can be handy. And the package name doesn't really matter. We'll use JHipster registry, which is just Eureka with a nicer UI on it. We'll use OAuth 2.0. We'll do a SQL database, and production we'll use Postgres. We have talked about making Postgres the default instead of MySQL. How many people like that? All right, maybe we should do a pull request tonight, huh? We'll use H2 with disk-based persistence. You can use in-memory, but that can be frustrating, right? Because you restart your server and all your data that you just put in is gone. Second level cache, we're going to say yes. How many people prefer Gradle? Nobody? Is this on the live feed? Sorry about that, Gradle guys. Maven? Ant? No one likes Ant, right? Okay. Whew. I was just thinking, you know, with no one liking Gradle, maybe use an Ant. So we'll use Maven. They have colored logging now, right? That's pretty cool. So not going to use a search engine for the gateway. We'll use Angular 6, and then SAS, we'll sure. Internationalization, yep, we'll just do English. I'm not going to pick another one. I will do Protractor, right, so I can test the UI, and then no other generators. So that's going to go and create all those files, and then run npm install, which is the hardest part. I actually have another laptop that I stopped using because Okta installs like virus scanning software, and when you have millions of files that are being installed and it scans all those, this JHipster process takes like 10 minutes, right? And I was talking to all the rest of the JHipster guys, they're like, it takes me like a minute, man. What's wrong with your laptop? And I was like, I got to stop doing demos or something, so I just got a different laptop. Now we go into blog, and we can run this here. So this is JHipster, and this is just going to be a microservices app, so it doesn't have a UI. Base name is blog. We'll run on a different port, 8081. Com Okta developer blog. And JHipster registry, we have to choose the same type of authentication. And this one, use a SQL Postgres database. Disk-based, we'll use Hazelcast for a distributed cache. And then Hibernate, Maven. We'll go ahead and try Elasticsearch here. Internationalization, English again, and nothing else. Okay, so this one's going to be much faster because the only dependency it has is JHipster. And that's to do like entity generation and stuff like that, but there's no real UI. There has been talk of doing like a Swagger UI on our microservices, right, to show you the endpoints, but we haven't done that yet. And then the last one is going to be store. So here we'll run JHipster as well. And I'm going to do MongoDB for this one. So 8082 and com Okta developer store. And JHipster registry, OAuth 2, SQL, and then, oh, I did it wrong. Got to start over. Said I was going to do Mongo, and I didn't. Monolith, microservice, store, 80, 82. If you go through the whole thing, it'll save your answers, but it obviously didn't because I canceled it. JHipster registry, OAuth 2, MongoDB, Hazelcast, Maven, Elasticsearch, sure. Internationalization, yep. English, nothing else. Gatling and Cucumber, nope. And then install those. So at this point, we should have everything we need to actually log in and see the app and see what's there. But we have to start some containers, just like that Eureka server, right? So for the gateway, there's a JHipster registry. So you can use Docker Compose to start it. Source, main, Docker, JHipster registry up. And I do -D so I don't have to look at the contents, right? It's just a daemon at this point. If you actually want to see it running in various windows, just don't put the -D on there and you'll see it, and then you could cancel it. Since we're using OAuth 2, we have to use Keycloak as well. So start that up as a local IDP, and then we should be able to start the gateway. And then for the blog, there's nothing in development, right? We're using H2, so we don't have to worry about that. Oh, we do have Elasticsearch, right? So Docker Compose. Well, I fixed that, so it runs Elasticsearch embedded. See if it works. We are using the master branch. And then for the store, Docker Compose, we have to start MongoDB. Source main, Docker, MongoDB, up -D. And then we can start up the store itself. So between the version of like 5.0.0 in JHipster and 5.2.1, Elasticsearch, if you used it in development, you actually had to have a Docker container running. And that's because the Spring Data support for Elasticsearch no longer ran an embedded Elasticsearch. And then we found this project called Spring Data Jest that actually does Elasticsearch embedded, and it'll also use Elasticsearch's HTTP API, which is very handy in the cloud, right? Because Heroku and everyone only supports HTTP. They don't support the binary protocols for all their add-ons. So that's what we recently integrated, and Elasticsearch is now embedded again. And it'll start just a local server up as part of the process. So any questions at this point? I do have prizes for questions. So first of all, there's a bunch of stickers up here. I'm not going to throw you stickers because they don't really work to throw, but there's a bunch of JHipster ones. There's a couple Okta ones. We even have this guy that's an alternative JHipster guy, and we're actually thinking about having a logo contest because we need like a bunch of alternatives. Like if you look at GitHub and the Okta cat, right? They have all these different ones, so we're going to try to do the same thing for JHipster. I also have a few t-shirts. I even have a ladies V-neck, so a couple mediums, I think a large and an extra large. And they say in Star Wars lettering, I find your lack of security disturbing. It's the best t-shirt to wear to the airport. Okay, so everything's started up. Let's take a look. We'll close all our other tabs, and we'll take it back to that size. So now this is Keycloak. We can log in with admin, just like you can with user. And then we don't have any entities, but you can see the basics of an application, right? It shows you the current routes that are there, the metrics, so all the different performance metrics that have happened so far. We haven't done a whole lot, so there's not a lot in there. All the different health checks that are available. And this is an Angular client, right? So all this information comes from APIs that are in JHipster. So if you wanted to, pull them into a different UI, you could. Auditing, the logging. You can actually tweak the logging on the fly. So if you went to Org Spring Framework and you wanted to change the debug, it'll actually do that on the fly. That's part of Logback. And then Swagger API, so you can go to accounts and say, get my account. You can actually test it down here, try it out. And you can see it gets all your account information. So if you have people that are not doing the UI or that are just doing the UI and they want to see what the back-end returns, you can do it that way. And then the last thing here is the database. This is just for H2, right? So you can actually get to it. Yeah, that's about it. We need to generate the actual entities to see much more than that. So I will stop the gateway, stop the blog, stop this. And for the blog, what I have, I'll pull it up here. So start.jhipster.tech is another way of developing an app or creating an app. So you have to register. see if I can remember my account number. Probably not. How many people use like 1Password or LastPass to remember their passwords? Good. More than any other meetup I've been to this week. Because if you're not using them, you got them in your head, right? How many accounts do you have? 100. How many passwords do you use for multiple accounts? Lots. So here's where you go to so you don't sleep tonight. HaveIBeenPawn.com. You can put in your email address here, and they'll send you an email where there's a data breach and your email was in that data breach. And then you find out that, hey, you know, some company, I used X password for that. I also use it for my bank account. And you might not think that's a big deal, but if they get access to your email, they go to your bank and they reset your password, now they got access to your bank. They can transfer funds out of there. If you're like me, you don't have anything in there, so not a big deal. But you know, someday maybe there will be, and then you know, there goes the mortgage. So I recommend you sign up for that. Let's see, I keep them all in here, so put my password in, and then there it is, JHipster Online. Go and copy it. And then you can basically go to this entities. So these are a couple entities I have in there. We call it JDL Studio. And this allows you to design your entity model or your domain model. So we have a blog with a couple things in it. And you can see the diagram on the right here. We have a blog with a relationship to user, many to one. And then it has, you know, one-to-many relationship with a blog entry with title, content, and date. And then many-to-many with tags. And so we can basically download that, and then what you can do is you can do JHipster. Let's do clear so you can see it a little better. JHipster import JDL, and from that downloads JHipster JDL, and it'll go and create that whole domain model for you. It'll prompt you to overwrite the Liquidbase files. Liquidbase is responsible for creating the actual schema and doing data migration. So that's in there now. And we could restart that, but before we do that, it's important to go into the gateway and generate the UI. So here we'll do entity blog. You have to do them individually, unfortunately. So from an existing microservice, yes, it's in the blog directory. Regenerate it and overwrite Webpack. And then this is one of the things I was going to fix. So right after you generate an entity, it goes and recompiles everything. And that was because for the longest time with JHipster 5, we didn't compile automatically. Now we detect if you've actually built the TypeScript and created a main.js, and if you haven't, then when you start at Maven, it'll build that for you. So we don't actually need to compile all the code after we generate the entities right now. So like for entry, I can just create the files, and then I don't need to do the compilation until, you know, it starts up. So regenerate it, overwrite that file, then I can do tag as well. Yep. All. Okay, we'll let that compile, and then we'll just close this to give us a little more room for the store. So with the store, I'm going to use JHipster entity, and I'm going to create a product. I'm just going to do it manually. So this is what I have in my book, and it's the painful way of doing it, right? It prompts you with questions. So do you want to add a field to your entity? Yes. What is the name? It's going to be name of a product. We'll call it a string. Validation rules, yep. It's required. And then another one, yep, we want a price. We'll make it a big decimal. Do you want to add validation rules? Yep, required and minimum of 0. So it already knows that. And then, sure, we'll add an image. So there's a blob down here that's been in beta for 3 years. I think it's time we take the beta tag off. So we say an image. We won't do any validation rules there. No more relationships. It prompts you, do you want to use a service class, right, between your controller and your repository? I'm going to say no. Do you want to add pagination? Sure, we'll do pagination links. And so it generated that there. And then up here we can say create the UI for it. So yes, from an existing one. Go to store, regenerate the entity, overwrite that file. And why it's overriding Webpack is because it has proxy information in there that basically says, hey, when you're running on port 9000, you know, proxy blog to this 8080 or 8082 or whatever information for that backend service. So now we can start that one. We can start store. And we can start the blog. And now we should be able to go and add information for each of those entities and like edit them and CRUD them basically.
Does JHipster have a web interface?
Well, that was the start.jhipster.tech. So
All you're doing here can be done on the web interface?
yep. So this guy right here, you can go and create an application, right? Create application, and it's got all the information. So what it does is it checks it into GitHub or GitLab. So you put this information in. What type do you want to create? What is your package name? You know, you basically answer all those same questions. And it puts it out there. And if you want to use Heroku, Heroku has GitHub support. So you could actually do everything without even touching the command line. If you want to do like a cool demo for your company or for your friends or whatever, right? One of the things that I wanted to do last year, I never found the time to do it, was I thought it'd be cool to write like an Alexa skill. So you could say, hey Alexa, yo, create me an app. Right? And then it goes all the way to, you know, production. So yeah, it's got all that in there, right? React, Angular. And so it's pretty neat. You can also download it as a zip file. You don't have to put it into, you know, GitHub or GitLab. And then continuous integration. You can configure that all too. So, you know, this was inspired by start.spring.io, but it's pretty powerful. And I don't know if there's a link to it, but maybe statistics. We now started tracking what everyone's using. Metrics. I don't know the URL, but it's out there somewhere. It's obviously not exposed on the UI, but it shows there's like 30,000 people that use this. And we can see what everyone chose, right? So you can see like, what's that? There we go. It's new, right? Come on. So look, 30,000 projects. You can see what they're all using last month, last year. And then there's some things at the top. We can say Angular versus React. Right? Angular's winning. They're getting close down here. Maven versus Gradle. It's like Maven's winning, but they tied on this day at this time, last 24 hours, last month. There's some fun stuff you can play around it, right? It's real data, which I don't know how many people are creating like apps and actually going straight to production or even developing them, right? They might just be doing demos like me, but it's cool to have that information. So back here, see if everything's up and running. Localhost 8080. And the other thing that you might use, especially on the gateway, is yarn start instead of 8080. So yarn start or npm start, doesn't matter which one you use, actually starts up browser sync. So if you make any changes to the JavaScript code, it'll automatically reload. Same thing if you make any changes to, you know, the Sass code or the CSS. It's dynamic, it's fast as soon as it compiles everything. And I'm not going to change any UI stuff, so it's not really needed here. But it logs in, and then you can see the entities, right? We have a blog. We can create a new one and say, you know, JHipster Dublin. Call it Dublin as a handle. And how the OpenID and the OAuth 2 works is we actually sync the users as they log into a local database. So in most cases, you wouldn't even have a user object because they're on the IDP. But then it's kind of a pain because in JHipster, you're so used to using the user as like a central object that you might map things to. So what I did is I created logic that actually syncs as soon as you log in to the database, and then it's read-only. We never have the ability in JHipster to update that user, but it'll keep your users in sync. That's why you don't see user in here. And if I logged in as user, then it would be in that drop-down. So we have that. You know, we could create a new entry that says whiskey tour at 10:40 a.m. tomorrow. That's real. I'm doing that. It's like the teal one or something like that. My parents got it. It was a time that was available, so why not? You know, should be fun. Then we can associate it with that blog. If we had tags, we could associate it with that as well. And we can go to product. We can say create a new product. We'll say beer. It's $5. We'll choose an image. I have one in my downloads directory here. Just a beer icon. We save that. So even the images are working, right? We can delete one. The funny thing about the Mongo Docker container is whenever I do this demo, right, I'm not using H2, so it saves my last data in there. The cool thing is I could actually run Protractor. We're working on making it faster, so I'm not going to do it because it's kind of painful. But it'll go through and add all these entities. So it creates tests for all the CRUD stuff for you, as well as like unit tests and all that. So you can see that, you know, everything's working here. Let's go back to the presentation. We'll convert it to a PWA. So this can be done via source main doc or web app, or you're not going to be able to read that. In the index.html, you can see uncomment this for adding a service worker. All right, that's all you need to do right there. And then you have to run it with the prod profile. So if we were to cancel this and then shut down this and then mvn-p prod, then it'll enable the service worker. So when you're doing development normally, that service worker won't be in there and caching stuff. And then I'll show you how to test with Lighthouse. So questions. I got these t-shirts, and can I have a t-shirt is not a valid question, but most other ones are.
Once you set up an application with JHipster, is JHipster just something you can run once, or is there a dependency on JHipster libraries, for example, in that application?
Great question. What size? XL. So how it works is similar to AppFuse in the sense that when I first started AppFuse, this has got to be it because I don't see. There you go. You're basically generating your project and then you shouldn't worry about it, right? Like, it's your project, it's your code, it's your dependencies. It's like a normal project where you'd upgrade the dependencies on your own. And I've probably been the biggest proponent on the project of being like, that's how it should be. But when you generate a project that's 15,000 lines of code, there's people that are like, we never changed this, you know, in the UI or in the Java code. So maybe we should have a server-side jar that we can start putting stuff into, or a client-side library that we can start putting common functionality into that people don't change, so it can be smaller. And so we have done that. There is like a JHipster framework library on the back end that's probably still only 10 or 15 classes, maybe a bit more, and we have ng JHipster and a React JHipster for the front end where we're putting common functionality in. And what happened about a year ago is someone was like, hey, you know, you could upgrade all this stuff if we use Git. And so now we have an upgrade subgenerator that you can run JHipster upgrade on a project and it'll upgrade your whole project. So that's why it kind of became a platform, and that's why we started using that word, is because it is possible for you to actually use it and upgrade between releases and do that. If the upgrade generator, subgenerator fails, you can always just create a new project and like compare it with your old one, right, using a diff tool. Or something that I do a lot is I'll rm-r the whole project. You know, it's in Git already, right? But when you rm-r, it doesn't delete dot files. So you still have that .yorc JSON file, and you still have your entities, which are in a .jhipster file. So you do jhipster space -- with entities, and it recreates the whole thing, you know, using like the latest version. And then you can use, you know, your diff tools in your, you know, IntelliJ or whatever and say, hey, you know, what changed, right? And re-implement your custom logic. And there was a great talk done by one of the DevOps guys at JHipster Conf in Paris, where what they've learned to do is not modify the JHipster classes that it generates. They create like subclasses or extension classes. So they can regenerate a whole new project and it never touches any of their code. So that's a strategy as well. So why did this fail? Something's got to fail, right? Oh, we got to start our Postgres database. Docker compose f source main docker Postgres up -d. Right, because it's running in production now. So
One of the links you showed was said JHipster 5. Does it use Spring 5?
yes.
So it's reactive?
No, so we have, it's a great question. What size?
Medium.
Medium. Do you want the V-neck?
Sorry, Matt. No, you repeat the question.
So the question was, he asked if it uses Spring 5 or Spring Boot 2, does it use Spring's reactive support, which is called Spring Webflux, for the web front end? And we do have that actually in, let me see if this is a V-neck or not. It is. So you want the other one? The ladies get the V-neck. You can have it if you want, but I'm saving it for them. We have support for microservices. We don't have support in the monolith. Part of that is because our React and our Angular front ends aren't ready to support streaming data, right? And that's what Webflux gives you, is the ability to have streaming data. If you're using Webflux and building a CRUD app, you're doing it wrong, right? It's like building microservices when you have a team of 1 or a team of 5, right? You probably don't need them. And so it is like part of the project is experimental now. If you create a microservice and you run jhipster -- experimental, it'll ask you if you want to use Webflux. And so I'm working on a blog post and an example app with Josh Long right now, where he's developing the back end using Webflux and I'm developing the front end using React. And we're going to figure out, how do you handle streaming data and how would you do that? And then I'm doing a talk at Spring 1 in 2 weeks about that. So I'm learning on the fly, but it's React, right? I got to learn it a week before it's going to be out of date. And so, so we're going to be publishing a couple blog posts on the Okta developer blog on how to do that. And then I expect some of those ideas might make it into JHipster. Okay, so it's still not working here. Guess what? You don't get to see progressive web apps, right? I mean, I tried. It didn't work, so we'll move on. The last thing is Docker. So what time are we at? We're at 8. We started at 6:30, so it's getting a little long, right? I'll just show you how to generate the Docker, but I'm not going to run it because it does take a while to start up. So we'll create a Docker directory here. We can kind of close these ones down since it doesn't matter if they're running. And we'll cd into it, and you run jhipster docker compose. And it prompts you what type of application we're doing, microservices, and JHipster based on Netflix Zool. The root directory is up there, blog, gateway, store. And then since it knows you're using MongoDB, it asks if you want to do clustering. I say no, because last time I did that demo, it failed. Set up monitoring, we'll use JHipster console. And then curator is Zipkin, I'm going to use Zipkin. And then the admin password, we'll just use the default, which I don't recommend. And then you have to go build like the Docker files, right? So you build the project in its production mode, and then you run Dockerfile build, and it creates those Docker containers. So you do need to have Docker running locally. If you want to deploy it to the cloud, you have to actually deploy them up to the cloud. So I do have videos out there, and actually a lot of this presentation I did as a Pluralsight course back in March. It was published in April, and it's basically 2 hours of me working with another guy, Michael Hoffman, who's done a couple JHipster Pluralsight courses, and it shows you how to do all this, and it's not boring because it's a conversation, right, that we're having. We don't do the OAuth stuff, we just do JWTs, but I've heard that if you register for Pluralsight through Microsoft, you can get like a 90-day trial. If you go directly to Pluralsight, it's like a 10-day. So, hi Pluralsight. Now you know how to skip the registration. But yeah, search for JHipster microservices on Pluralsight, and you'll find my course there. It'll show you how to do all that. We'll go back here, and we'll zip through some of this stuff. So as I said, I'm not going to deploy to the cloud because that's a terrible demo. But options for deploying with JHipster are many. For Heroku, you can use JHipster Heroku. And for microservices, you actually have to deploy them each separately. So if you go to the JHipster registry on GitHub, there's a button that you can click that'll deploy it to Heroku, and you don't have to download anything. And then you can build and deploy those microservices using JHipster Heroku, and then you have to configure them to talk to that registry, and then you can build and deploy a gateway. So the last I checked, I actually had one running out here called Okta gateway.herokuapp.com. See if it's still running. We can sign in, goes to Okta. Not now. And then you can see we're logged in, and it's got blog entities, right? So shows that it all works, and I think it's actually a progressive web app, so we could even test it here and see what kind of score it gets. So this is where it throttles the CPU, it throttles the network connection, and it sees how it performs on mobile. Not well. So I'll remember to skip that demo next time. For monoliths, you can use Cloud Foundry as well, so JHipster Cloud Foundry. What we've done with that one is we haven't found a good way to actually detect and configure the database on the fly, so it just uses Postgres. If you chose MySQL for your app, it's going to fail when you deploy it. But you go in there and you change from Postgres to ClearDB, I think it's called, and then it'll work. So if anyone knows Cloud Foundry real well and knows how their APIs work, we could certainly use your help in improving that. For microservices, it's the same as Heroku. On AWS, we have a new subgenerator called AWS Containers that works pretty well with Elastic Container Service. You can also use Beanstalk and Boxfuse. So there's documentation on that. Google Cloud, Kubernetes. Ray Sang is on the team, and he created the Kubernetes subgenerator. We also have Google App Engine support, which is kind of going through a renaissance now. Their largest client pays uses like 90% or pays like 90% of their revenue, Snapchat, right? So it's working pretty well for them. So it's a viable platform still, but you can run it in Minikube locally, or you can deploy it to OpenShift, or you can deploy it to Google Cloud. And I wrote a blog post on how to do that, so you can find that there. And what I'll do after this, probably later tonight, early tomorrow, is I'll publish all of these slides on SpeakerDeck and SlideShare, so you'll be able to find them, download them. Most of these things have links on them if you get the actual PDF. And so then this is the demo that isn't fun to watch because it can take a while, so we'll skip that. And then the last thing I want to talk about is mobile apps with JHipster. So me personally, I wanted to create a better mobile experience just because the 21 Points app that I wrote for the JHipster book I've been using for 2-3 years now, and the experience on mobile wasn't great. I mean, at first it didn't have Remember Me, right? And Remember Me, like you got to go into 1Password, you got to copy the password, or you got to use it through 1Password and enter your password each time. Like it's kind of a pain, right? But there is cool things that you can do on mobile, especially in a native device, right? You can talk to like HealthKit from Apple and know that they took 10,000 steps in a day and automatically put that into the app, right, and sync that way. So there's cool device stuff. So I used Ionic for that, or I created basically an Ionic for JHipster submodule. Not really a submodule, but a whole module by itself. And Ionic allows you to use web technologies to develop these mobile apps. And what they found was it used to be called PhoneGap, now it's Cordova, right? But Cordova has a bridge from the native to the web container using JavaScript. And Ionic's actually even created their own now. So Ionic 4 is going to have their own, not Cordova, it's called Capacitor to do it just because they had issues with Cordova. Stencil, these guys believe in the web, and that's why I like them. Ionic has another thing that's just vanilla web components, right? That's called Stencil, and you don't even have frameworks. The reason they developed that, because they want to make Ionic so it works with React, Vue, and Angular, not just Angular. And then a PWA toolkit, which is just a GitHub repository that you'll clone. So like I said, 21 Points Health. I do like to tell the story of 21 Points Health if you'll humor me. So 21 Points Health, I was writing the JHipster book, and I wanted to have a real-world app because I felt as a consultant, I didn't really have many good apps that I could say I helped build that, right? I helped work on LinkedIn and Overstock, but I really didn't build them. And so I wanted to have something in production that says, hey, I know what I'm doing, right? So rather than just a sample app, I built 21 Points Health. And the reason was because around the same time, I had done a sugar detox, 21-day sugar detox with my wife. Has anyone done a sugar detox? So they work, but I didn't really know much about it going into it. One of her fitness friends was like, this is a great idea. We have a team of 10 people doing it. You should sign up. So that weekend we signed up. We got the book like Sunday night. We didn't even read it, and you're supposed to like read it and get educated and know what you're getting into. So we didn't. So on Monday we find out that there's no beer. It's like, this is going to be a long 3 weeks, right? And after like 5 days into it, I ran out of high blood pressure medication. So I've had high blood pressure since basically like 22, 23, right out of college. I went to my doctor, and she was like, you got to do something about this, because if you don't, you're going to have a heart attack before you turn 35. So at 38, I finally went into the doctor and was like, I need some high blood pressure medication. And they gave me some, and then, I'm 42 doing this sugar detox, and I find out that I run out. So, I go to the pharmacy, and they're like, you got to actually go to your doctor, and he's got to do some tests and, maybe change a prescription. And I was like, I'm already in a bad mood from the sugar detox. I'm not going to actually go to the doctor. So I waited. And at the end of the 21 days, my blood pressure was fine for the first time in like 20 years. So I was like, maybe there's something to be said here. So I created 21 points, and how it works is you can get 21 points in a week. You can get 3 points a day. So you get a point if you exercise, you get a point if you eat well. For me, that's no sugar. It might be different for you. And then the third one is if you don't drink. But that's really no fun, right? So I allow like a glass of red wine or like a Greyhound or a healthier drink, but only 2. You get into 4 and you lose a point. You get anything more than 4 and you get like -1. So even if you ran 2 miles or whatever and had a good day, you can still lose points. So I found that that was a fun app to write, and I use it a lot. So I'm a user, and it works well. But I still want a better user experience. So that was the reason behind Ionic. I still haven't developed the actual Ionic app, but I do have what's needed to get started. So how is a mobile app for JHipster different from its Angular UI? A lot of it's just like the transitions and how things work. Like it's a responsive app that works okay, but it's still not as good as it can be with a mobile app like Ionic. So you install it with -G. You need the Ionic CLI and then generator JHipster Ionic. You run it with JHipster Ionic, and then you profit, right? Because all apps in the App Store make money. Haven't you had people come up to you and be like, "You're a programmer, right? I got a great idea for an app." That's like going to like a best-selling novelist and being like, "I got your next big book. I'm going to give you a great idea," right? It doesn't work like that. Like, yeah. So I like to show this demo because it's kind of fun. So we have Gateway running here, and we'll start up the other ones as well. Blog and store. These should still be working. What's that? So they have blocked Ionic apps? They have already done that? I'm not worried about it because I don't have any in the App Store yet, right? That will be a rude awakening, though, if I finally develop this thing and go to put it in there and they block it. Yeah, they can be a problem. So now what I'm going to do is you actually create this outside of the directory, right? So not in an actual directory. If I go into just this apps right here, we can see all the rest of the stuff. I run yo JHipster Ionic. And what I learned is to actually leverage the Ionic CLI. So rather than trying to recreate it, there's 2 components to this. There's one that's an Ionic starter. So you could actually run the Ionic command and starter and point to the repository that we have for JHipster, but that's only going to create a JWT app. So if you want OAuth or any additional behaviors, that's not going to work. So we say it's located in the gateway, and then it uses that Ionic start, Ionic for J, that's just the name, and then Okta developer JHipster is where it's located. That's our GitHub repo. And the reason we needed a starter is because I experienced some frustration at Devoxx last year. I was going from Devoxx Belgium to Devoxx Morocco, and they upgraded the Ionic starter that I was using from Angular 4 to Angular 5 like over the weekend that I was working on this thing because I wanted to demo it at the conference the next week. And it took me like hours to figure out what happened, right? So I needed a way to lock down like the versions that I was using. So that's why I developed the starter that still like depends on theirs, but I can say, hey, this version of Angular, this version of other things that we're using in here. And so it does that, and then it prompts you to try to install the Pro SDK, and then it goes and adds custom stuff for like OpenID Connect. So it'll go and modify the actual application. So we will need to restart our gateway after this, and it tells us that. It says, hey, you need to go in there and restart it, and then if you're going to run this in production, you're going to actually need to enable cores, right? Because now you have an app that's talking. It's not in the same app like JHipster is, right? It's on a different port. It runs on 8100 or on a device, right? And the funny thing is, I lost hours figuring out that Cordova, the emulator, actually runs on port 8080. And so when you're trying to talk to a backend that's on port 8080, nothing works, right? So you have to change the ports there too. But now we can restart our gateway here. And I'll just show you how you can log in. let's make it more fun than that. So clear. Why isn't this guy working? We can do cd into Ionic for JHipster. You can do JHipster or Ionic, JHipster Ionic. You can create entities. So we can do product. And it'll prompt us, do you want to, does this already exist? We say yes, and it's in store, and then it regenerates it for us. We overwrite stuff. Now we can do Ionic serve, and it'll actually talk to that backend, and it'll have, that CRUD interface for you to CRUD that entity on your client as well. I always type service or server, but you have to type serve. I actually like some CLIs will actually allow server, right? I think Ionic's not one of them, but maybe it's Angular. Instead of doing like ng serve, you can do ng server. Like it knows your typos and those still work. So this opens up and you can see it's got some weird stuff there, cached. So sign in. You never saw that. So it looks like, oh, this is maybe a Keycloak thing. So let me look. 9080 auth. This is one of the bugs I fixed today. I don't think it has the right configuration. Yeah, so implicit flow is what you need when you just have like a mobile app, or you just have basically something that you don't want to store a secret on. Right, a mobile app goes into the app store, so you don't want to store a client secret on that. So I did change this, but forgot to do something. So now if we go back here, we should be able to reload and then log in. So it redirects to Keycloak. We're already logged in, so it comes back here. We can go to our entity, see product there. It's got no products found. There it is. All right, and then you can swipe. You can edit it. You can change it to $6. Then you save it up here. And you might be like, that kind of looks funny, but then if you use the device toolbar, right, and you see what it looks like on an iPhone or whatnot, we could change it to like iPhone X. Looks a little better, right? You can add a new one. You can say bread. And the price is $10. It's really expensive. Oh, I clicked on the wrong one. You got to click up here in the corner, and then it adds it, right? And the cool thing is back here, not on this one, but localhost 8080, you can see it was added. Oh, take out that device toolbar. Sign in. You can see the product is here too. And you could even add another one. We'll say, I don't know, more beer. And the price has gone up to 10. And you save it. And then on the client, you can pull down. Right? And it refreshes and it has it in there. So it's kind of cool. I think there's a fair amount of people using it. It's got a fair amount of downloads, but because there's like that bug where if Keycloak isn't configured or your backend isn't running, it shows a stack trace. I don't know how many people are actually using it, right? Like someone would have fixed that by now and been like, hey, we can't use this in production. So that was the demo for that. I didn't do the emulator, but instead of doing Ionic serve, you can do Ionic emulate, and it starts it up. You emulate iOS or Android, starts it up in an emulator, and then you can test that all that works. So today we learned about, obviously, Spring Boot and Angular and JHipster. You saw a little bit of what Okta does, but you just saw it with Keycloak. So the cool thing about JHipster is all you have to do to change to a different IDP like Google or Okta is override the actual properties. So I have in my home directory in okta.env, those are the properties I override. So client access token URI, some things for the endpoint, the client ID, and the client secret. So Spring Security makes this possible. We don't have any Okta code in JHipster. And when Spring Security 5.1 comes out, those first 3 URIs will go away and there'll just be one. It's called an issuer. And so pretty simple configuration. And the Ionic and there's another one for React Native. They read it from the server side, right? They read that information so they don't have to hard code it locally. And it's a pretty nice way to develop. I like it because you can use Keycloak in development, right? But then it's paying to do production with Keycloak, so just use Okta, right? Come on, you know you want to. Almost done here. So what's next for JHipster? Blueprint support is already there. So if you want to override the default way that apps are created with JHipster, you can. If you want to have Kotlin instead of Java, there's already a JHipster blueprint for that. If you want to have Vue.js instead of Angular or React, that is being developed right now. So there is work being done there. Like I said, the Spring Webflex support is it is in the master branch, and it's experimental. It's not exactly part of the defaults yet. Start.jhipster.tech is pretty cool. JHipster 5 was released in June. Obviously, the React support is already there. I just didn't have anything else I could think of that we were adding. But I also developed a PWA using React and showed you how to do that. I wrote a blog post about it. I've always wanted to create like a gallery like Flickr for like Volkswagen buses, right? Because then I can look at buses all day. And so I kind of started that with this, and maybe I'll actually create a real app someday. The JHipster mini book is a free download from InfoQ, written with ASCII Doctor. They thought it would be their most expensive book ever. Turned out to be their cheapest book ever, because they thought I would create a PDF and then they would have to modify it to work on a Kindle and on iBooks and all the different devices. But ASCII Doctor can do all that for you. So when I've actually finished writing, the update for it, I ship them the artifacts and they publish it on the website. There's no like middle person involved. So I actually created a template for that. It's called InfoQ-mini-book. If you search for that on GitHub, you could write your own mini book. The cool thing about writing a book is obviously you get well known, you can speak at conferences, and a mini book is the best because they try to keep it under 100 pages. And if you've ever written a real book, like it's a real pain in the ass. You'll probably have fights with your spouse because you're working on the book late at night and stuff like that. So I don't recommend that, but I recommend the feeling you get when you're finished with it, right? That's the best part. The 21 points is available there. You can learn more on Spring.io guides. I often point people that are brand new to Java to the Spring.io guides because they're very use case driven and they're very easy to learn. JHipster.tech has some documentation, but the mini book is kind of written like a blog, right? So rather than teaching you and showing you, it would have taken hundreds of pages to show you everything I've done. So I kind of talked about it. Here's what I did, and show you a fair amount of code, and then it's all open source. There's another book called Full Stack JHipster that's written by two of the main committers on the project. That's much more large, 350 pages, that you can buy. And they have sales all the time where it's like $10 instead of its regular 40. If you want to learn more about OpenID Connect or OAuth, hit us up on Okta. And I've often worked as a consultant, and I found that Stack Overflow is the lead developer on my team. So obviously you should use that if you can. You can follow us on our blog. We publish blog posts all the time. The beer service I posted today, I rewrote with Java EE earlier this week and posted a blog post on that. So if you want to use Tommy or Pariah or any of those and not use Spring Boot, you can. And it's almost actually less code than Spring Boot. So I was surprised by that. Jakarta EE is coming out the end of this year, and Jakarta EE 8 will align with Java EE 8, and then there will be no Java EE 9, right? It's Jakarta EE from now on, and so Java or Jakarta EE 9 will probably be sometime next year, and they will define what goes into that. That's a full open source community project now. If you want to see when we post our blog posts, follow us on Octadev, and of course you can follow me on Twitter. If you do, you'll get the links to my presentation when I post them later tonight or tomorrow. I'll put them up on SpeakerDeck there. And then most of my code these days is on GitHub, either at Okta Developer or /Matt Raible. And yeah, that's it. Any questions? We got 2 more t-shirts. Wait, he's first. He was sitting in front of you. And I'll repeat it.
Talked about the Netflix Hystrix.
Yep.
And the support for that.
Yep.
And handling like 500 gateway errors. Can you talk a bit more about that? Or?
So he's asking about Hystrix and failover, right? It's basically the ability to have, normally you might not return an empty array, you would return like some default data. So if we had our beer service, just as a simple example, right? We would return 3 or 4 beers, or maybe Netflix, returns their top 5 movies that have been cached before, right? When they go to the recommendations engine and it's down, they can still return the data from the last request. So obviously you'd want to have a little more logic in there, but it allows you not to fall down when services are down. So it's one of the tenets of microservices that if everything's distributed, like don't fail when you can't actually talk to a back-end service. Did you want a t-shirt?
I have one already.
You have one already, all right.
If you have several microservices and you use, let us say, JWT tool for authentication,
Right?
how can you share the authentication token and all the roles associated with a user between all the services?
Okay, so the question was how would you share a JOT or a JWT between authentication services? So you can do what's called a claim. You create like a roles claim or a group claim, and that's what we do with Okta is you even when you set up JHipster with Okta, you do that. You set up a roles claim, and then that roles gets translated into Spring Security authorities, and then Spring Security reads from the authorization header your access token, and it reads that claim, and then it maps it to be an actual user with those roles. And so you can use like a pre-authorized annotation, and you can say it has to have this role to do this. You could also inspect and see what the principal's name is if you want to get fine-grained or something like that. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay.
How manageable the data schema?
How do you manage the data schema? So that's what Liquibase provides, is the ability to actually migrate between one release to another. So I wrote something on the JHipster book blog, jhipster-book.com, that explains like moving from JHipster 2 to 4 and things that changed in my application. And the best way to do it is there's a diff tool you can use. So you can make changes to your database or even your actual entities, and then you can run MVN Liquibase diff, and it'll create a changelog file that you can then add to your master changelog in Liquibase, and it'll make those changes. So if you want to drop a column, add a column, change relationships between tables, that's how you would do it. There's also Flyway DB or Flyway that is popular for doing the same things as Liquibase, and people have suggested that we switch, but no one's done the work, so Liquibase works. But there is a new InfoQ mini book written with the same ASCII Doctor template that I used that is like Spring Boot best practices. Just came out this week that does use Flyway, so if you want to see that as an alternative to Liquibase, you could do that, and that'll migrate your stuff. So did you guys, I got 2 left. Or actually I only have 1, I have a large. You want it? Too big? You want it? All right. And then ladies, one of you is going to have to ask the question. Or I'll just leave it up here if you're too shy.
Can you add text style to before generating the code?
Can you add text style? Check style.
Yes.
Actually, we don't use check style, we use Prettier. So Prettier is a formatting tool that actually just reformats the code based on the rules that you define. So check style will basically say, hey, you're doing this wrong, this doesn't work, fail the build. Prettier just says, you're doing it wrong, I'm going to fix it for you. And so there's a really good implementations for like, I think JavaScript, ES6, TypeScript, but the implementation for Java isn't quite up to snuff. So we've been talking with the author of that, and just this week he was like, I'll give it to you. Right? He was like, I don't have time to work on it, so JHipster, you guys seem to be using it a lot. Why don't you maintain it? And so, so we were like, gulp, okay. Because we really want it, right? We want the ability, basically, these templates, we have EJS templates, they're called. They're, for basically manipulating and putting in different variables when you're using like JWT versus OAuth, it switches things out. But sometimes like it's a pain to align things right, and so the code might come out with just a few little misaligned things and it looks funny. But if you use Prettier, you just reformat it, and then it's like you used IntelliJ, and no one ever knows the difference. And so we're very into that. And what's happened is Epon is a company in France that Julian works for, the founder of JHipster, and they will have their trainees work on JHipster for like their first 6 months. And so he actually has a guy that's going to work on Prettier full time and like bring it up to snuff. And it's not just for JHipster, it's for any Java developer. You can actually have it as like a pre-hook process for your Git commit.
But can I override the defaults?
Yeah, you can go in and change Prettier to what you want, right? You want curly braces on the next line, don't you? No? Yes?
So how much actually, my question really was about Docker, but it's more about how if you want to go outside of what JHipster already gives you,
Right?
what would you do?
So if you want to go outside of what JHipster already gives you, as far as deployment or just general development?
Both.
So the first thing, just like development-wise, treat it as your own project that you created with Spring Boot and Angular, right? Those guys give you like a shell and that's it, right? So all the dependencies and all that, like willy-nilly, like delete them, add new ones, you know, do that kind of stuff. As far as deployment is concerned, they're wars and jars, right? So you know how to deploy those in Docker containers or not, or using Kubernetes. So, you know, if you can do it with Spring Boot, you can do it with JHipster is usually what I say.
Yeah, so you're running stuff in Docker. Like, so you had some Docker composer.
Right, but like, oh, so you would install Postgres and run it on port 5342, right? You would install MongoDB using Homebrew. Right, you could use a different JDK, and we've had our eye on Java 9 and Java 10 and Java 11. Like, I get emails from the Oracle people because they reached out to JHipster and were like, we'd like you to test new builds, but I just haven't found the time or the desire to actually test them. But, you know, I mean, if...
It's just OpenJ9 is designed for Docker.
But isn't it just IBM's JDK, right?
There's a lot more in it.
Okay.
It's designed to do much faster checks, a much faster stack up, and there's quite a lot of new stuff in there. So it's designed for microservices, shutting down and starting up.
Sounds like we could use it, right?
Interesting stuff going on.
Yeah, so I would try it, and if you run into problems, send me an email or create an issue on JHipster, and we'll try to make it work. I mean, that's how most things happen with JHipster is people try them, they don't work, they file a bug, and then we try to fix it. And we try to get, you know, a good amount of community around it that wants that feature. And I don't think there should be many issues with it. If it's faster, then yeah, let's do it.
Okay.
Is that it? Is that all the questions?
Any more questions?
You got to do like your closing notes, right?
Fast, man.
All right.
Can I get a hand for Matt?
Yeah,
That was fantastic. Well done.
thanks.
So, two very important points. Number one, we're going to go for a few beers if anybody wants to come along.
Right.
And number two, there are Matt mentioned blueprints. There was a lot of tech to take in. It's you know, people talk about full stack developers, and I kind of visualize it as being top to bottom from the front end down right through to the database and stuff like that. But these days it's kind of going laterally as well across from your desktop through to production. So that's a big space of tech to cover in quite a short amount of time.
Right.
Everything Docker, Kubernetes, all the way up to you know, web frameworks. But I think it's gave you a sense of what the stack is about and what JHipster is about. We have a little bit of experience. Matt mentioned blueprints. We probably wish they were there in Sauna Lake when we started, or the guys started writing multi-tenancy extension for JHipster. So I have some of the developers here if you want to talk to them. Mairead, Alessia, Gordon, and Jonathan.
Alessia.
Oh, sorry, Alessia. Sorry, Susanna. Sorry. Are here. So we built an extension for JHipster to take care of multi-tenant apps. If you want to generate multi-tenant stuff, as people tend to do, and so be sure to catch up with them if you need to do that. And
You need to advertise that more, you know. I don't think a lot of people know about it.
Doing?
All right. Well, hi, Web.
So, but to everybody that's here, thanks a million for coming along and staying late on a Thursday night. And but before you go, I'd like to say thanks a million to Max, who has been live streaming and videoing this. And Max has a company that he wants to tell you about, and has an event happening in Edinburgh in February that he'd like to say a few words.
You got to get past the middle there, right? There you go.
Hi everyone, my name's Max. I work for a company called Product Forge, which is based in Edinburgh, and we run hackathons in Scotland. And we are running the Digital Health Product Forge next February. It's a 3.5-day hackathon, and it takes participants through a process from identifying a problem that relates to health through to designing a product, building a digital prototype, putting together a pitch, and then pitching in front of a panel of judges. And it involves kind of making sure that you've got a fully validated business case. You'll be working with people with a variety of different skill sets, so we'll be designers, healthcare professionals, data scientists, software engineers, developers, that kind of thing. So if you are interested in health tech, please come and say hello. I've got some flyers, I've got my card, I can give you my card. And if you know anyone that is involved in health tech in Dublin, also please come and say hello. We're really keen to get people from various different European health tech hubs, Dublin included, to attend the event. So come and say hello. Great. Thanks.
Cool. And don't forget to grab stickers. I don't want to take any of these home, so take more than one.
Okay, so I think we're going to head over to Mulligan's. It feels close.
And Okta's buying, so you got no reason not to go, right?